All right, good morning, everyone. This is our Act on Homelessness Collaborative Upper State Street Regional Action Plan. We meet weekly and have been doing that since November. A few things just start off this morning. We have Fire Inspector Aaron Lynn with us. Sergeant DeJean is with us, as well as CityNet. We want to obviously address top of mind and top of concern for the region over the last few days. So Sergeant DeJean, I will start with you just from the law enforcement. Actually, no, I take that back. Fire Inspector Lynn, I'm going to start with you in terms of your response, the encampment related fire in general, and then I'll go to you in terms of the incredible work that's happened in the last few days.
Okay, so I guess you want to know a little bit more about the fire on Upper State,
that
or
would be
just
great.
as a whole. So a couple nights ago, we responded up for a vegetation fire at the 101 State Street and 101, kind of the overpass right there. It's a known camp. It was getting cleaned out at the time. Preliminary investigation, it's a cooking fire to what we can tell. We don't have anything to say otherwise right now. The only, I guess, interesting part about it is there's nothing there, and the cooking fire was started, under some low-hanging vegetation, but right now there's no indications of anything other than that.
And in terms of the size of the response, is it because it's kind of county and city jurisdiction there, or was it just, again, in terms of the danger of the fire spreading from that location?
It's got a lot to do with the amount of vegetation in the area. It's pretty heavy timber, heavy fuels, and a little bit of a wind condition that night, and the location with where it's at. There's not a lot of fire breaks. If it was to get past that particular point, then we would be dealing with a whole bigger issue. Right. So it was pretty imperative that we get that contained in that little island right there.
Thank you so much. Thank you to you and your colleagues and the City Fire Department and the County Fire Department for, again, that really incredible response and how quickly and swiftly that was addressed. Sergeant DeJean, I'll turn it to you just in terms of the ongoing impacts to the region and, the fact that there was engagement, obviously not just through the Upper State Street Regional Action Plan, continuous engagement with CityNet, but law enforcement was also present in that area before the incident and since the incident.
Yeah, sure. So the day of the incident, Chris Clark actually made me aware that the Caltrans cleanup was occurring. The day following the fire, I went up there with my team, and there was a significant amount of property on the sidewalk. I would say maybe 40 yards worth of sidewalk was being occupied by property belonging to the different homeless people. We contacted the different people that were there. We contacted 4 different individuals that each said they had been from the camp. They said that there were about 8 others whose property was on the sidewalk, but they weren't currently there. We got them moving in the direction of getting off the sidewalk to somewhere else. Made contact with Emily and her team from CityNet. They responded out there right away. I know that they were there most of the day. We ended up, after we kind of got the ball rolling and provided some warnings, but in time frame agreements with the individuals, we left. But I was in touch with Emily's team, and they had some success getting at least one female housed from there. Followed up over the next, up until this morning, doing spot checks, and there was always progress being made. This morning, the final bit of property was being moved by the final 2 individuals. There are currently 2 large piles of trash off the sidewalk that Chris is aware of and will be taken care of. Otherwise, looks like the people have moved on to wherever they're going.
Thank you again to you and your colleagues and the department in general for the swift response there too.
I'm sorry. On a side note, I was just up there a couple minutes ago. We've had 3 calls this morning for illegal burns throughout the city. One was in the location, but we couldn't find it. But the address that was given from the passing motorist was up there. walked through there as much as I could to try to find anything, but couldn't. And there was just one occupant that was still in the camp sleeping.
Okay,
But just as a FYI.
thank you. Thank you for sharing that detail. And that you were both up there this morning, which is, again, really helpful. Brad, we have a good full team from sitting at here. Do you want me to start with you first or turn it to Emily or Al? Just in terms of your engagement and ongoing engagement with folks.
Yeah, so I mean, overall, so I agree with all those assessments, obviously. So we were able to, we had 2 beds available to us that sort of speaks to the challenge. We would love to take everybody to some other location indoors, but the 2 beds that were available, we were able to have one individual go to that location and is now sheltered, which is great. The other bed, we have not been able to get a candidate, but we also have 2 others that were case managing from the streets that were in this general area that are waiting. They're the next 2 in line for beds that come available at another shelter location.
Okay.
So that's sort of the totality. Our team has been out there working with those individuals, trying to help kind of downsize, do all the things that we would normally do. So we had a total of 4 working that location primarily over the past couple of days.
Okay.
That's sort of the short of it.
No, I again, I appreciate that. And, we had just been there as a RAP team, engaging with a number of folks there that, again, we're familiar with you and your team because of work at the Rose Garden Inn or otherwise. I'm going to open it up for questions now that we've had an incident debrief. Any questions? Jane?
Hi, everybody. I know I come to these meetings and I sometimes don't even talk, and I'm just a citizen that first respects very much the work that you do, and I try to pass that on to people on next door, and because there's a lot of people that are just complaining, and so I'm trying to just educate myself and maybe find a way to help this committee. I do have a question. I know that on Nextdoor, somebody had sent photos of that encampment. And so I passed that on and said, I'd pass this on. This is how you report this, and they did also say that the people had 5 bags of charcoal, which I did pass on. And so my question is, it seems like all of the homeless encampments must be a fire hazard. I mean, I don't know, do people go out there at night? Or I think that the citizens are mostly concerned about fire at this point. And so I know when the big fire happened at TV Hill, it seemed like that was an emergency and got everybody into the Rose Garden. But like, what level of concern does it have to be before people can legally be either asked to move, which I know is just kicking the can down the road and isn't a good solution, but how do we prevent the fires, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Question.
Yeah, Terry.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought I was muted.
That's okay.
I just think it's a good question.
Yeah, I agreed. And again, this concern is absolutely top priority. So Chris Clark, I'll start with you first, just in terms of how the encampment reports, in terms of theirs being submitted and noting that there is, fuel there or potential, again, fire hazard always exists because people are living outdoors and in that environment. But in terms of elevating, that is even more of a priority because we've observed behavior or something to the effect and how you respond and again, share that information with the fire department and others.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. So our staff review every report that comes through and we assess the description that we're given, if we're given, any photos are submitted with that, and we're actively looking for potential fire hazards. If the reporting party has any kind of fire concern, if they've written in the description, or if we observe one, we also go out and visit these locations and are looking for fire hazards. If we observe that, or there's been a fire concern reported, all of those reports get forwarded over to the fire department. And they respond, and they submit back to us an assessment on whether or not there is a fire concern there, or if there isn't. And that immediately puts things, if there is a fire concern from the fire department, that puts it up at #1 priority. That means getting the outreach teams out there as quickly as we can and getting the cleanup process started as quickly as we can. So that's the process. I think probably it'd also be great if Aaron could kind of go over, what are fire hazards, how he's assessing those things.
Absolutely. I was going to turn it over to Fire Inspector Lynn next. Aaron, can you just share again a little information about knowing that it's just a hazard in general to be living in the environment outdoors, and using cooking utensils and things like that, how you prioritize as a department, your response, again, knowing that this has been a growing concern over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and first and foremost, when people report the encampments through the link, when it goes to Chris, they get to us, we go to every single one of them. So don't stop doing that for anybody that's on here. We go daily almost to these encampments, and when we're walking around for the fire department's purposes, yes, we could probably call every single one of them a fire hazard. We probably could. Legally, though, what I'm looking for is anything outside of basic camping tools. Like, so I'll go to campsites, I'll see a like a what you would generally use when you're going camping out in the woods. Those are typically contained containers, so they're not an overall threat. They're designed to contain a fire versus just open burning on the ground. If there's evidence of just open burning on the ground, which I would say is like a bonfire or a warming fire, or just taking sticks, putting stones around and setting a fire, that's when we'll immediately call this an open fire hazard. Majority of the stuff that I see when I'm out is you'll see makeshift ovens, where you'll see old charcoal grills that have been just the bottoms of them that are together, and they're using that to heat up food inside of the metal container. Legally, we can't enforce on that because it is an approved fire container. Where it's at, yes, it's more of just an illegal camping issue. And the only thing that gave us the enforcement was the designated fire prone area. That gave us the enforcement to go ahead and move anybody along. But when it comes to like the camp that we saw up on Upper State, I went through the camp 2 days prior to the fire I went all the way through the camp 2 days prior. I didn't see anything outside of normal camping stuff.
Okay. Thank you both. I appreciate that detail. Conrad.
Hey, Barb. So as you know, you, I, and Al, we were in that encampment like a week or two ago. Where did, after this fire, where have the residents moved on to from there?
Yeah, Brad, if you want to just share and repeat a little bit of the information. One individual was accepting a shelter bed and was able
Right,
to
I heard
place
that.
in the 2 available shelter beds. 2 others are in process in terms of another shelter bed location referral. And Brad, information that I'm missing there, I know that there's a number of people that you're continuing to case manage that have moved on.
Yeah, I'll defer to Al on that. If there's any details we can give, he is on the call also. I know Emily is also on the call. So Al, do we have any latest, greatest that's relevant to share? The answer is probably scattered to the wind, right? I mean,
Yeah, so many of them have moved on. We haven't, and that's one thing that we're going to do, especially ones that we're case managing, is do our best to track them and continue engaging, because the one thing out of all this is housing, is being able to provide more shelter. That's really what it comes down to. And for us, just continuing to keep pushing forward and connecting with our clients and making sure they're engaging. As you saw, Conrad, many of them that you got to engage with up there in this specific camp were from the Rose Garden, and you kind of saw the conversation that you had and where they were at, even during this struggle.
Yeah,
So
they were very high functioning individuals. Like those were definitely, in my opinion, the kind of folks that you could help and get services to, and that it actually make a difference in their lives. Not a lot of, severe mental illness, very candid about like some of their struggles and stuff where, when someone realizes and admits they have a problem, they can actually start dealing with a problem, whereas they don't think they have a problem. Well, it's a different story. I do just want to kind of point one thing out here, and some of you may find this a bit controversial, but if all these people scatter from the wind from this spot, strategically, if you're going to have homeless folks rough sleeping in an area, you just had the fuel lowered via fire. If they move from there, they're probably going to come back down the State Street corridor a lot closer to your residence. You guys are going to get a lot more calls. And that area was right near that day center, a gas station, a McDonald's, Big Five, and it was out of the public's eye. There's been homeless people, especially in that little triangle right there by Big Five, for like half a decade, same people. If folks are going to be sleeping on, outside, that wasn't a bad area overall compared to some of the other areas. Just my 2 cents.
Conrad, I appreciate you saying that. I think you see a few of us saying, yeah, that is the reality of what we're dealing with. But yes, we also had a number of concerns, the reports coming through as we were doing a site visit, conducting case management outreach in the region. It is, when are these people going to be able to leave, knowing again that there was potential danger. But they are, again, moved to another location that is equally as unsafe and is equally risky. So this is the complexity of this work, which is those individuals, were stabilized at the Rose Garden Inn for the last several months. Because of the additional shelter beds at the Rose Garden Inn for that period of time, we were able to reduce fire risks, right? But then we lose those shelter beds. We cannot express enough that we need more emergency shelter beds in the city of Santa Barbara to serve more of these individuals. One is we can enforce, we can mitigate fire risk, we can mitigate law enforcement risk, right? And problematic behavior. And on the second side of that is people have a safe place to put their head at night. They are more open to services. They are more open to support. They're getting their needs addressed, right? Some are achieving sobriety. So we know all of that to be possible. But the pushback continues to be, where do we put those additional emergency shelter beds? Knowing that at any given time, it can be impacting the region where that shelter is located. So we work closely with Eastside residents and business owners. There's been a lot of work done around PATH and the rescue mission. Al was part of those efforts at the time when he was working there. We have done a lot to make progress, but we still need 262 shelter beds in the city of Santa Barbara to address the need from 2 years ago, let alone what we're going to learn with the point in time count from this year. So you're right, we've just moved the issues to another location, and the impacts that are ongoing in the region as they are, we are doing everything we can to be able to address that and be able to help the folks that were very much on the pathway of stabilization and getting housed. Liz?
Thanks, Barbara. Liz from the city of Santa Barbara. So I just wanted to elaborate a little bit more on Barbara's points. Additional shelter beds absolutely are necessary, but not just shelter beds. We need a variety of types of shelter, because a shelter, we know, is not appropriate for everybody. When I go to these outreach worker meetings, there's couples that don't want to be separated, and a shelter would separate them. So they would need a more private room or a place where they can share locations. There's a person that had 3 dogs. He does not want to give up his 3 dogs. So a shelter would probably not be a proper location for him. There's people that live in their vehicles that probably don't want to leave their vehicles because it might be the only asset they still own. So we need various types of shelters, non-congregate shelters. So that's again like private rooms as opposed to a dorm style shelter. We need safe parking locations so that people can put their cars in a safe space and park overnight and receive services. We need a wide variety of these types of services. And the problem when we try to do these things is where. And that's where we need the community to be our allies, people that come to these kind of meetings who are become educated in the complexity of homelessness to support when the city tries to come up with an option, when a nonprofit tries to come up with an option, when the housing authority tries to come up with an option. We need community support, we need backing, we need education and advocacy from the community. And that's something that I'm asking all of you to do. Now that you understand the complexity of the problem, of the things that we need, and the city understands these things, and we are exploring options, but we also have to address the constraints that we have, funding, location, neighborhood opposition, all the various things. So that's all I wanted to add.
Liz, we're definitely in agreement and working closely with you and city leadership on the variety of solutions that are needed to address the unique needs of individuals experiencing homelessness and families and youth experiencing homelessness. Again, that all require different approaches and diversity of options and solutions. Completely agree with you there. I also want to
support. We need the community support for this.
Completely agree. And I do think the level of engagement we've had with Upper State Street, the open dialogue and conversation that we've had has been really, really positive. But I also know that this has been a tough week and you feel unsafe and you feel threatened in your community by fire risk. And so we want to acknowledge that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Councilmember Friedman.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you for the discussion, the questions. So my question kind of dovetails on this. So we need the 262, and Barbara, is it safe to say it's probably going to go up based on the new point in time, or we just don't know yet?
Anecdotally, that's what we're hearing. Yeah.
So say we're still at that number, but the question then becomes though, once we get those shelter beds, or whatever, the shelter space, I should say, is the individuals don't have to accept services. I know some of them will and some of them won't. So my question then is, as we expand into neighborhoods, because it's unacceptable that it's just in one neighborhood, the east side. So it is going to be around the city. The question then becomes, if we're providing the space for them, but they're not accepting the services, that's the issue. So is there any way that they would be required to accept services? Because that's where the neighborhood tension is. Because if we took resources that we're spending to create those types of shelters and say we were to take that money and maybe invest it in other individuals in the community that are at risk of losing their apartment, maybe there are 2 or 3 families living in a 1-bedroom, and we could make those resources go a lot further. So my question is, how do we, in terms of the neighborhood impacts, is get the persons who are coming into these new spaces, if we're able to create them, you can't force them, but what do we do if they're just in there and they're say methamphetamine, they're still using methamphetamine? So that's what I'm hearing is the concern from the community, is that people aren't required to accept services. And I know there's not an easy answer, but I think that's the second part of the equation that we need to have an answer to before we start creating a bunch of new shelter space.
I'd appreciate that. And again, to reiterate, shelter beds are not the only thing that we need to be invested in at the same time that we're dealing with homelessness prevention and housing retention. You're completely correct. Sergeant DeJean and Brad, I'm just going to turn to you quickly, because the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals decision is that if we are able to achieve the number of shelter beds that are needed by our unhoused, unsheltered population, that we are able to enforce, I would say, more swiftly, as well as continue that level of enforcement, because there are available shelter beds for them to be able to be directed to. Sergeant DeJean, can I turn to you first?
Yeah. That's so far from happening that
Yeah.
it's not something that's been realistically discussed that much. I can tell you our city attorney's office is not at all interested in seeing camp enforcement because the decision you're referring to. We do camp enforcement, but it's not the traditional illegal lodging that you may have been familiar with from years before. We're enforcing camp structures, camps that have cooking apparatus, large amounts of property, et cetera. That's still enforceable. That's still something the city attorney's office will file cases on. And I'll tell you that this kind of goes in line with what the councilman was just saying. In all of those enforcements or contacts we have, which is daily, we're always offering city net and also inquiring as to their willingness to go into a bed at path or the rescue mission if we were to able to line something up. And almost always the answer is no, because there's fleas or there's drug dealing, or I can't be in the same lodging facility with my dog. I don't want to be separate from my wife, et cetera, et cetera. Just to kind of echo that belief that everyone will go if we have them. I'm not sure that's the case.
So,
No, yeah, Brad, go ahead.
yeah, so as an organization, we've been tracking this and studying this, across all the places we work. Our experience has been is that, and I think the Rose Garden would be an example of it, is that 82 to 85% of the folks, given an opportunity that is not sort of the traditional, it's the upper bunk in a room of 40 people sort of congregate shelter model. If it's not that, we do think that people do take up on that. So obviously, I agree with Liz. We need all kinds of housing at every level, and just sort of creating shelter beds doesn't sort of solve the bigger problem, but it does put people indoors, and stable and so secondly is, again, we don't, you can't enforce your way out of this, right? So, but that being said, so let me tell you sort of just out of my personal experience. So I have been out on outreach with federal Judge Carter many, many times. And I have been in encampments with the judge standing right next to me, with caseworkers. And I say this as an advocate. I don't want to arrest anybody unless they're doing stuff that you should be arrested for, no matter who they are, housed or unhoused. But in those cases, when there is a 60% of the shelter bed threshold met, when that number is achieved and you are genuinely providing, particularly if they're good options for people to consider, the Boise lawsuit gets mitigated. That's in practice. So in practice, and I've been in where the individual potentially, and this is a real story, talks to us and say, well, we are not going to go anywhere. And we're saying, no, we actually have a bed available for you. And here's a picture of it. Like, this is what it would look like. And it's a non-congregate shelter. And they said, well, we're going to take it up with we're going to, again, this is just a story, I'm not giving a prescription on how this works. But they said, well, then we're going to take this up with the judge. I said, well, that's good news because the judge is standing literally right here. I'll back away and you can take it up with him. And in every one of those cases, they were given options by the federal judge, take them up on this opportunity, move along, or you're going to be dealing with PD. That has been consistent. So it does it does focus the conversations. I'll say it that way. The conversations do get very focused.
Yeah, completely agree with that. And I also just want to reference, we do have AOT and ACT teams that behavioral wellness, manage, and those are for the most service resistant folks, as well as those that have demonstrated mental health disorders, substance abuse disorders, drug use as well. So it's the capacity of those teams. At any given time, they're managing 10 clients per team in the city of Santa Barbara. It's insufficient to meet the need, especially the escalating need we're seeing around again, mental health challenges. So there are different mechanisms outside of law enforcement to be able to manage folks who are resistant to services. Again, we don't like to use that terminology because we do believe over time, the majority of people will embrace those services as they overcome trauma and overcome their self-medicating behaviors. But this is the piece, is that we need to have all of those options available to us to be able to address the escalating need. Liz?
Thank you. I just wanted to add a lot of things, I think, as you're hearing in terms of laws are outside of the city's control. And a lot of decisions are frankly up to the state, up to the federal government. There have been some interesting developments. You might have heard last week, Governor Newsom has made a proposal. There's still a few details on it, but I'm certainly keeping tabs on it, on something called the CARES courts that would mandate, I think, mental health treatment and drug substance use treatment for persons experiencing homelessness. I don't know what the criteria is of how somebody would be mandated, but I'm hopeful that that comes with funding to provide these services. And those are the kind of things that we need as a city to be able to do these things. Like as somebody said, carrots aren't enough. There are sticks, and there are sometimes people that do need sticks. That comes at the state and federal level. That doesn't come at the city level, unfortunately, because we have to follow laws. So there are some interesting developments in the state, at the state level, that I think we're definitely keeping tabs on. And sometimes we might need to talk to our representatives at the state level and the federal level to push for resources and changes in laws that enable us to do the things we need to do to address a serious problem and to help people, the ones that really need the help, that are not ready to get the help yet, but their lives are at risk if they don't get the help. So this is exciting territory that we're getting into.
And I want to address Conrad's comment, in terms of the local emergency declaration of fire danger, which facilitated the clearing of encampments in high fire prone areas. So again, outside of state and federal regulations and CDC guidelines currently, we were able to clear those 5 encampments in those, again, high fire prone areas following a local emergency declaration. Councilmember Friedman or Sneddon, do you want to just address, again, the uniqueness of that process outside of other guidelines and regulations that we need to adhere to?
On that particular, with that, is because we had the rooms at the roads, so we had a place to go. And at the time there were more restrictions due to COVID, and we weren't allowed to abate the encampments for the most part. But when we declared the fire emergency and then opened up the roads, that's how we were able to move them out of those specific areas. And so that's the extra bed. That's the whole conversation we're having now, is those extra beds allowed us to do that. And so that's how, in that one particular case, things are a little bit different now because of COVID. So we are able to go in to the encampments, as we've heard today, but we still have, but then the outside of it is that you're still just moving people around, and they're going to go to the next place. And I think Conrad mentioned it earlier, is they're going to go into more populated areas and create issues. So it's kind of a revolving cycle, but the Rose was the key to what we were able to do for those 9 months or so.
Right. And we were only able to do that because there were available beds. So again, just reiterating that we need to be able to offer a variety of solutions to be able to make that happen. Larry, I see your hand up. I want to make sure we get to you.
Hi. Yeah, I had a comment and a question. The comment is view on the street from the area around my office, which is the Rose Garden area. Since the closing of that facility, my subjective observation is that there is a doubling of the number of homeless people in the alleyway behind my office, by the carport at Instrumental Music, the 7-Eleven, the visual presence many times during the day is significantly increased, not decreased. So that's my observation, purely subjective, and of course it varies during the different times of the day. Observation. The question is, wondering what the status of the shelter that was located on Calle Real at 154, the warming shelter, I believe it was, temporary. Is that been changed in any way? Is it still in operation? Are we sending those people in that direction, or what? What's happening, in the area around 5 Points, basically?
The Freedom Warming Centers are only activated during inclement weather. So that's 35 degrees or lower, or a greater than 50% chance of rain. So those are intermittent. The day center is open and actively engaged with individuals who are coming to that location, again, for supportive services, laundry, a meal, etc.
Okay,
Yeah, and we have Aaron Drake here with Good Samaritan Shelter that works with individuals at that day center location.
okay, and that threshold of 35 degrees, how did that come about? I mean, that's dangerously cold, but
Right.
45 degrees is also uncomfortably cold and is a good reason for starting a warming fire.
Completely agree. And we saw an increase in fire activity during, again, the coldest parts of the winter. And just last week, we had another cold spurt. And so we are in active conversations. This is a conversation that has been ongoing about the need to increase that temperature threshold in terms of warm center activation. So that is a County of Santa Barbara funded program. It also is a program that heavily relies on volunteers to be able to activate in advance. So although the budget right now isn't significant in terms of all of the work that we do to address the needs of individuals experiencing homelessness, it does require, again, more resources to be allocated for that purpose. And it would require more faith-based organizations and more volunteers to be able to step into not only utilizing their locations, but being able to staff those locations. So please know that this has been now brought up a number of times through our regional action plans because of residents and business owners that are really wanting to address this concern and fire risk, because we know we have the fire risk all year long. There's not just one fire season anymore. And that is one of the options that needs to be reconsidered if resources, again, can be made available through public-private partnerships and otherwise. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I will say, having done this work for the last couple of years, and many of my colleagues who've been doing it for many, many more years, every time the temperature gets below 50 degrees, I'm thinking of that top of mind, because that is cold for our community and cold for anyone who would be out in the elements. And you're right, Larry, too, just in terms of observing that increase. So last week during our discussion, knowing that the encampments were going to be approached to be cleared in that location, that we were going to see a lot of movement. And so we're going to continue to see a lot of movement this week, next week, as folks resettle. And Al and Emily and the CityNet team, again, will keep us updated in terms of if they're able to re-engage with folks that were engaged at that location and see where they settle in. Any additional questions? And Jeff, thank you for the information about the 35-degree threshold came from a national standard. And this is not just brought up by individuals experiencing homelessness. This is brought up by everyone about what can we do to activate the warming centers at a higher degree threshold.
Can I add real quick that on May 6th, the city and SBAC and a few local churches are having a community event. We're still organizing the details, but I think this would be an excellent thing to bring up at that discussion. We're looking to see how we can have the faith community help us out with addressing homelessness. So I think this is something we can certainly bring up at that meeting. May 6th, Brad.
Yeah, May 6th.
We're still working on the time. We're thinking that might be in the evening, but May 6th is definitely on the books. So I'll update everyone as we know more.
Thank you, Liz. And Jeff, anything more to add to that? I know that it's been ongoing conversations in the past couple of years because faith-based organizations have been that pillar of relief and support for our unhoused community. And now that we have more resources, now that we have a little bit more case management outreach capacity, really transitioning that relationship and that engagement from being relief oriented to more solution oriented. Is that correct?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. Yeah, faith communities have historically, it's really interesting, right? If you look at some of our shelters were started by faith communities and then it became nonprofits. So there's actually a long history in Santa Barbara of faith communities being heavily involved in solution work. And we have several faith communities still involved in our neighborhood navigation centers. We have a lot of activities with Westmont College. We have B'nai B'rith, who's heavily involved in some of the efforts. So we're just looking to host a conversation where how we can move more from relief to solution work. And so it's been something that Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez wanted to see happen. And so we're partnering with him and a few other faith communities to get it off the ground. So anyone who's connected to faith communities, if you want to get them connected to this event, you can just let me know at jeff@sbac.org. And Brad, if you want to get engaged at kind of the conversational dialogue level for the creation of this event, more than welcome to have you involved, have city not potentially involved there as well. We're looking to come up with at the end of the evening, it'll probably be an evening event, we'll see. At the end of the evening, 3 ways that faith communities can really get involved in more of the solution efforts that have really come out of these RAPs and working group conversations.
Any other questions and concerns? This is one of those tough moments that we have the answers, but they're not necessarily the answers that you want to hear. So I fully admit that. We just had a really incredible meeting yesterday morning, which is our all-call partner meeting, where we were sharing the successes of the past 7 months. We've utilized 89 emergency housing vouchers. City Housing Authority, in partnership with case management organizations, have housed 89 individuals in the last 7 months. That's 100% utilization of those vouchers, and the national average is 19% utilization. And that was because of landlord incentives, the attachment of supportive services, right? And then CityNet alone has housed 30 individuals in the city of Santa Barbara since November. I mean, these housing rates are astronomically amazing. So I know it does not feel like that when things like this week have happened. And please know that we want to address your concerns. The response from law enforcement, the fire department, outreach in CityNet, Chris Clark and code enforcement and his team. I mean, it's incredible to see what can happen to be able to, again, mitigate risk and make sure that your community is safe, but we don't want these things to happen to begin with. So I fully acknowledge that this is where the breakdown can happen and where we see, again, where the system is failing in a lot of ways, when hand in hand, it can be working in a lot of ways as well. Any more thoughts? Again, this is our community concerns second Thursday of the month focus. And so if there are observations, reports from that area, other parts of the community, other, again, areas of concern, we want to hear that today as well. Okay, Kayla, I'm going to turn it to you to share a bit more about the all-call RAPs.
Yeah, and Jeff can probably jump in as well. We're working to organize 2 all-call regional action plan meetings. So alongside you and the waterfront RAP, the State Street RAP, and the East Side RAP, we're pulling everyone together next Wednesday at 3 p.m. We'll put the Zoom links, Jeff, if you've got them handy, throw the Zoom link in the chat. We'll be able to send it out via email as well, so no worries about missing it if you miss it in the chat. Next Wednesday, March 16th at 3 p.m., we'll be doing a human trafficking kind of 101 breakdown. We know that human trafficking and homelessness are closely linked, as homelessness is one of the #1 risk factors for being trafficked into labor or sex trafficking. And so we're really excited to be hosting folks from the County Human Trafficking Task Force, and be able to delve into warning signs and ways to prevent, raise awareness for, and educate ourselves and all of our RAP partners on signs of human trafficking in our community. So again, that's going to be next week, 3 p.m. on Wednesday over Zoom. And then at the end of the month on March 30th, 3 p.m., same time, we'll be doing, the Pacific Pride Foundation has so graciously agreed to do a little bit of a training on Narcan and naloxone and just what we're seeing kind of community-wide with the fentanyl crisis, and a little bit of training on availability of Narcan, how it works, how to use it, and be able to make that available to RAP partners or service provider partners who don't have that ready access to that important resource. So that will be at the end of the month. We'll be able to send that link. It'll be a separate link from next week's out in an email to follow up. I'll be sure to get those links to you, Barbara, or be able to send out an email myself to all of you. We would love to see you on both of those all calls.
And to meet your neighbors in other regions, right? And it's really an opportunity for us to come together and for you to see the folks who are engaged in other neighborhoods, which is, we have awesome groups. And again, we're only able to do this because of your engagement. The last point is, this is our shortest running regional action plan. We just started in November, but we've had some feedback in terms of, can we restructure the RAPs to, again, make it more useful, more informative, and more accessible to folks? So we're going to be reaching out to a number of you to join what we're calling a focus group. That's what we do in the nonprofit world, to get your input on how we can, again, make these meetings as useful and informative and productive as we can for all of you. And understanding that there's only so much time in a day. And I think zoomed out is an understatement for where we are 2.5 years into the global pandemic. So we just want to make sure if there's an opportunity to engage you in person and engage you at a time that, again, is more accessible for residents and business owners, we want to hear that as well. And Jeff and Kayla put information on the all call regional action plan meetings coming up. Any other questions, concerns, comments?
Barbara, can I share about, we've been talking about housing and shelter. We do have a RAP Path Welcome Home Kit challenge if anyone wants to get engaged in. As people move in, Path creates these welcome home kits, approximately $250 for our kit. We can send the flyer out to you, but we're kind of promoting this within all of our regional action plans. Key thing to also reducing homelessness is once people move in, is keeping them in, making sure that their housing is somewhere they want to be, that they have everything they need. So if you have an interest in that, just want to throw that out to you. We're doing it with all of our regional action plan calls right now. Just a little bit of a fun challenge to see who can come up with the most welcome home kits.
And I will send that flyer out. We'll share the recording by the end of today, if not tomorrow morning. We know that there's a lot of folks that need to hear, again, just more about the response effort, the engagement effort, the impacts experience on that Upper Street 101, 154 corridor. So we want to make sure that people have access to the recording of this meeting as well. Thank you all for your patience, understanding, engagement, support, respect, coordination, even just having the communication that we had as the incident unraveled earlier this week. We're so appreciative of that. And I heard from a number of residents by email, and I was able to share information as it was available to us. So again, I just appreciate the open pathways of communication. If anything comes up, please feel free to reach out to me or Kayla. You have our email addresses, and I will follow up end of today or tomorrow with the recording of this meeting, as well as the flyer if you want to get engaged in helping folks welcome them home to their new permanent housing unit. So thank you all so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. I hope you have a good rest of the week. See you soon.
Thanks all.